Hello, English teacher friends. So for this video, I have another practice rhetorical analysis for us, and it's a fascinating letter that John Steinbeck wrote to Marilyn Monroe that is very nuanced, very layered, as we would expect from someone as cunning as John Steinbeck. And in terms of the trickeration that it presents to the students, there were a few new rhetorical things in here that I don't think my students had seen in any of the test prep material or anything else that we've done this year. So oftentimes I like to think, what might the College Board throw at our students, to stump them, to trick them. And this has the caliber of stuff that possibly might get tossed their way as the exam becomes more rigorous and more stringent. So if you want a copy of the letter, you can find it easily on Google or Yahoo. Just type in Steinbeck's letter to Marilyn Monroe. This one's not tricky to find, but fantastic nonetheless. So I'm going to do the same old in this writing workshop. I'll show you how I instructed my students to write the essay, incorporating my templates of the declarative and inverted thesis, and for their introductory paragraphs, and then for the body paragraphs, we're going to hammer out the syllogistic method as always. So I'll just talk you through it, and you can go your own rate with your students. So one of the things I always preface my videos with is the idea that you got to Bob Ross your instruction. And what I mean by that is you're the expert writer in the classroom as the teacher. And I think it's vitally important that teachers write with their students so that students have a lot of models and exemplars. That's how learning happens best in composition classes. And what I did up until March 15th of the academic year was I Bob Ross my instruction. So literally, I would say, all right, we're going to take a look at this Frederick Douglass speech. We know that you can only declare your thesis when you're doing rhetorical analysis. Here's 3 introductions I wrote. On your mark, get set, go. It's kind of like Bob Ross going to the canvas and the easel every time and walking us through the painting. And as you know, as you can envision, if we are totally inept with a paintbrush, we can closely approximate what Bob Ross is doing because he's taking the lead. So you have your struggling and emerging writers in your classroom. They will elevate. They will grow and mature as writers if you do this on a consistent basis. So I tell my students every academic year that I retire on March 15th. I cease to be Bob Ross. So we did this Steinbeck letter to Marilyn Monroe on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, and I did not Bob Ross. So you're going to see the writing that they do independently of me. So I get my kids after Labor Day in September. So I have until early September to May of the exam to coach them and train them to use and incorporate my templates. So you're getting a true vision of what they can do a couple of months before the exam. So the first question we got to ask ourselves is, how do I write the introductory paragraph? And there's 2 ways to do it with my templates. You can declare or invert the thesis, and I will unpack what I mean by both in just a second. But I'll start off by saying this. For rhetorical analysis, and for those of you that are familiar with my work, you'll see that we always declare the thesis. And then for those of you that teach, literature and have seen my videos or have worked with me in the mastermind, you know that for literature, you always invert the thesis. So we're going to go over the declarative since we're doing rhetorical analysis. And if you want to preview the inverted, just go check out other videos. And the cool thing about my templates is that they're universal. You can use them across the expository modes. For synthesis, persuasion, argument, research, it's a 50-50 coin flip. It's kind of contingent upon the prompt. And then the direction that the student wants to take the thesis. So you can declare or invert for synthesis, argument, persuasion, and research. So just practice, 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 and kids can figure out what expository mode they're writing in and make their intent. They can make good writer choices. So implicit in every prompt, you have two questions. This is my contention. So I encourage you take a look at a few of the FRQs for rhetorical analysis that the College Board has put out, and see that what they're really asking, what they're really asking students to do is answer two questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? If students answer those two questions in their introduction and ascertain accurately the meaning of the text, so they don't have any misreads, they've done, a total read, they're going to come out of the gates just blazing, right? In terms of establishing their thesis. They definitely will have a thesis point, and a very strong thesis at that. So what you're going to see my students do is tackle both of those questions within the space of the introductory paragraph to establish the thesis. So let's focus on what the declarative thesis is, since they are going to declare. So with regards to those two questions, you are going to begin with the thesis. Just first sentence, boom, answer the question, right? And then what you'll see my students do is rhetorical analysis is probably the most academic, pedantic, expository mode. You got to geek out. I tell my kids, you got to get your inner nerd on. So I really want them to have an academic tone without sounding contrived or pretentious or going outside of their wheelhouse. So I tell my students to use a fair amount of what I call tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word. So you'll see augmented vocab in my students' samples. And I'll say this. One of the things that I do is in an intensive word study academy. I have a lot of vocabulary exercises that I do throughout the academic year. And when I work with teachers and push into districts and work with departments, or through my own consulting, it really emphasizes the fact that students are, I got to qualify that. They're not reading less, but what they are reading is not really text rich for the most part, stereotypically, generally. So there's a vocabulary void for our students. So I really spend a lot of time filling those gaps, and, Word Study Academy is really important. And I'll make some videos about that in the near future, because that's really something that my students spend a lot of time on. So you fill it with context and background, right? You can't just drop a thesis in a vacuum or a void. You gotta have the context and background. The other thing you'll see my students do is vary their sentence constructs. So we use Strunk and White's The Elements of Style, it's the new version, Write It Right. So Elements of Style is the old one. So Write It Right, Strunk and White, Write It Right. And in it, Strunk and White assert that there's 12 different ways to construct a sentence. So you'll see my students manipulate their syntax in order to achieve voice, rhythm, and flow. And we do a ton of exercises on this, because typically when I inherit students in September, the bulk of them pretty much only yield 2, 3, 4 sentence constructs, and they tend to be of the short, simple, declarative variety. So you get the chop, 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 chop sort of flow. I'm sure you've seen that in your students' writing. So to break them of that habit and to get them to grow and mature as writers, a lot of exercises learning how to manipulate syntax. And I do have some videos about that, and that's one of the staples of my teaching when I teach teachers how to teach writing. And then the kicker for introductions, whether you're declaring or inverting, is it's going to be exactly 4 sentences long. No more, no less, exactly 4 sentences long. That's all the space you got. You got to cut to the chase, because, as you know, it's a timed writing situation if we're doing rhetorical analysis for Lang. So begin with the thesis, tier 2 level vocabulary, context, background, sentence constructs, exactly 4 sentences. So just as a quick flyby, when you invert for literary analysis, the only difference is that you end with the thesis. So the first question that you answer is, what is the authorial intent? And that's the first 3 sentences. And then you end with, how does the author construct meaning? So you're going to use your terms and devices down below in the thesis to get to the construction of meaning. And a ton of videos on that if you want to go explore. So I have a term device bank that I show my students, and they made this list. So we read a passage pretty much every day for just to practice our reads, because I find if a student is not going to be successful on the exam, that's one of the reasons, is that they don't read well, and of course that's going to impact the multiple choice score, but also the rhetorical analysis essay. So we read short passages all the time. And I tell my guys, it's pattern, 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 pattern. There's only so many things you can do rhetorically, theoretically, technically, and the same devices and terms recur over and over and over again. So this is kind of our bank of the high flyers. Of course, there's other things that appear, but this is the bank that the students made recently of what they've seen over the course of the year. So we are expecting in this to possibly see a few of these in the introduction. So before we lock in on the student examples, here's what I tell my students. When you're looking at the construction of meaning, usually, I'm going to qualify that, always terms and devices interlock with each other. So like exclusively saying that the tone constructs the meaning or the syntax constructs the meaning, it's an incomplete, inaccurate read. So the terms and devices hold hands with each other. So in the introduction, I tell my students to find the 3 most salient terms and devices that construct meaning, and you lead with the most important one. So that's something else of, this list, and of course there are others. I realize that. Find the 3 most pertinent, salient terms and get that into your thesis. So this student starts this way, all right? 4 sentences, drop the 3 terms, authorial intent, construction of meaning, sentence constructs, tier 2. So that's the whole template. Not wanting to be annoying or burdensome, Steinbeck manipulates his celebrity status to make a rather ridiculous request of another celebrity. So that's the ethos, right? We're implying ethos, and that's super important. Employing dry humor, he deprecates himself and his nephew-in-law before dropping his real intentions for reaching out to Monroe. So you see, my students do a lot of implication. I think it's more skillful to do that than to say ethos, pathos, logos. Almost painstakingly, Steinbeck makes it perfectly clear that a man so accomplished as himself would never ask for such a favor. But he's just being a swell guy doing something grand for a mere fixated pubescent. In order to soften the awkwardness of such an entreaty, Steinbeck reasons that these kinds of things are just part of the comedy and tragedy of being placed on a celebrity pedestal. So you can see here, when you get into words like reason, you're talking about the logos. The dry humor kind of touches upon the tone and the pathos. So you got the 3 most salient things in here, but look at these sentence structures, right? Just reread this and listen to how it flows, right? There's good voice rhythm flow, really good vocabulary in it. The kid doesn't sound like a goon. They don't sound contrived. They don't sound pretentious. But good words like painstakingly, fixated, pubescent, celebrity pedestal. But one of the things that I really coach my students on is this. If you have a rhetorical analysis piece that's kind of flip, informal, then we talk about the use of the academic, the colloquial, and the vernacular. And Steinbeck has this jocular quality in this. So, my students, ask themselves, since he's taken that tone, can I use some colloquial and vernacular? And I say, absolutely, right? If you have a real straight up pedantic piece, then you probably don't want to do that. But look at how the kid is using swell and grand, right? I love it. It's sort of like this language, the letter was written in 1955, and the student is using some of the discourse of that era to establish the thesis in order to achieve the voice. I thought, like, that's skillful. That's really, really good. So out of the gate, this kid's blazing, right? There's really good quality writing. So let's take a look at student 2. They're going to manipulate the exact same template, right? And just come up with slight variations. Like a mosquito trying to explain why it annoys, Steinbeck goes to great lengths in terms of rationalizing the gist of such a bizarre request. So you get his positioning, his rhetorical positioning, and his ethos, and kind of the logos. You're hinting at the logos too. Angling himself as a celebrity on par with Monroe, Steinbeck reasons that such entreaties are just part and parcel of the territory of fame and fortune. Going the route of humor and self-belittlement, he on one hand acknowledges how awkward the whole thing is, but on the other hand makes his sincerity known. Even his sentence structure indicates the hesitancy, discomfort, and bulky nature of what he's asking for. So this student did something a little different in terms of the 3 things they're focusing on. You can see they added syntax as the third. And you totally could go that route. So you're not relegated to like the 3 most absolute terms, right? One can easily argue that his syntactical manipulation is super important in terms of constructing the meaning of the work as a whole. And the student is fine. But again, look at the sentence structures. Look at the voice, the rhythm, the flow, the academic diction. 4 sentences, right? What is the authorial intent? How does the author construct meaning? So you can do this all day long. And I know that some teachers say to me, but Christian, it's a timed writing. They don't have time to do this. And I differ. With my students, the writing's going to take care of itself. If the student has given me an iota of effort during the academic year, they can crank these in their sleep. It just becomes so intuitive and instinctual to write this way, because I've Bob Ross the heck out of it. They've practiced the heck out of it. So for my guys to write 4 sentences like this, I would contend that the teachers that advise their students to do the 1 sentence thesis, my guys could probably do the 4 sentences as quickly as those students that painstakingly do the 1 sentence thesis drop. So, matter of preference. I think this is more artful, more skillful than the 1 sentence piece that we see a lot of students do. But your choice. So here's one more. Exact same template, different student, exact same approach. While wanting to earn the favor of his nephew-in-law, Steinbeck rhetorically tries to sidestep what is clearly a very bizarre favor: authorial intent. Using his ethos as a celebrity, he leverages his request through humor and the acknowledgement that celebrities simply just have to deal with such trifling matters. It's part of the job. His diction reveals the fact that his request crosses a line, but his insistence upon being on equal footing with Monroe affords him the space to do so anyway. Almost as if throwing his nephew-in-law under the bus, Steinbeck implores Monroe to do a pathetic kid a solid. All right, it's, perfect. 3 things, the 3 most salient things in terms of terms and devices: authorial intent, construction of meaning, sentence constructs, tier 2, context, background. And you see here, this student went the route of some colloquial and vernacular with the academic. I love the ending here: a pathetic kid a solid. Right? We hear our students often say, "Hey man, do me a solid," when they're asking for a favor. And I want my students to sound like they're 16, 17, but like an academic, great thinking, active noodle, synapses firing, 16, 17-year-old. So in order to get the pizzazz of voice, I like to see them do that. But you got to go, with things like rhetorically tries to sidestep, leverage, trifling, great, academic diction like that, mixed with throwing his nephew-in-law under the bus. So if you can teeter-totter balance, that colloquial vernacular academic, wow, oh, wow, like that's top quality writing. But it's really contingent upon the rhetorical analysis passage, right? This one, given its its levity, students have license to do that. But if you're analyzing, what was it, the Obama eulogy to Ted Kennedy, you probably don't want to do that, given the sort of heavy nature of a eulogy. So text contingent. So the next question we have to ask ourselves is, how do I write the body paragraphs? And as always, we're going to bust out the syllogistic method. I'm going to assume that most of you are familiar with my work at this stage of the game, since been posting. And so I'm going to give a cursory overview of the syllogistic method. For those of you that are unfamiliar with my template, just go through the YouTube channel and find the videos that concretely introduce the syllogistic method, because it is complicated. It's a little tricky to go over. There's a history to it, but it's definitely accessible to students once you unpack it for them. So in brief, the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, and Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn polemics, oration, debate, basically word wrangling, and what would happen is these essential questions would get thrown out to the students and the great philosophical think tankers of the time. And in a classic book called Plato's Republic, you get an example of how the Lyceum looked. The question of what is justice is thrown out. And in a sense, one man comes to the mic and he says, "This is what justice is." And then all the other men gather together and they find the cracks in the definition, the holes in it, and they rethink. And another man comes to the mic and says, "No, this is what justice is." And they just wrangle it back and forth. But each definition is in syllogistic structure. And Aristotle realized in his teaching that the really good orators, his best students, structured their line of reasoning syllogistically. And it's just basically a very logical, cogent, mathematical way to drop your thinking and to drop your logic. And when you are arguing syllogistically, you're going premise, premise, conclusion. So if I were to say something like this: premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. You're naturally going to conclude my dog is going to die. And when our students write, that's line of reasoning, right? This is ultimately what we're trying to get them to do. Be this lockstep, be this bulletproof in your reasoning, and you're going to be pretty good, right? Especially if you're meeting the demands of the assignment and you've read the passage correctly. So in terms of performing rhetorical analysis, this is how you tweak that construct. The first premise is going to be an argument containing your terms and or devices. You're doing rhetorical analysis. You got to set your argument up to perform rhetorical analysis. And one of the things that we can see, and I'll make a video of this because it's really fascinating. Oftentimes, students don't have a first premise. They begin with a second premise, and it's why we, as readers of their essay, say, why is there so much plot summary? They start with the second premise and break task. They're performing plot analysis and not rhetorical analysis. So we want to be mightily careful in instructing our students how to set up those transitions from paragraph to paragraph. So here's the skinny on this. On the synthesis essay, the College Board says repeatedly, your argument must be central. And I tell my students, man, I wish the College Board said that for everything, for the lit exam, for the laying exam, because we're doing expository writing. And expository writing is the art of arguing. So even if you're doing like an analysis of a poem, you're arguing. So I tell my students, your first 3 sentences are to be comprised of the first premise. Absolutely ensure that you're articulating a very clear argument, right? The other thing that you're going to see my students do is they multitask their terms and devices. Otherwise, if you don't multitask, the student will have to set up their essay this way to get the totality of the read. It would be 1 paragraph tone, 1 paragraph diction, 1 paragraph syntax. So in order to get a rich read, a nuanced read, the student needs to see how the pieces link together. So like, how does the syntax impact the tone? You know, something along those lines. And then how does that intersect with the development or, you know, the destruction of the ethos, right? Link it all together. So that's going to be 3 sentences. From there, you segue into the second premise, and that's the textual support. And it's where the student begins to quote and paraphrase. And I like to see a teeter-totter balance between the quoting and paraphrasing. I don't want one done more at the expense of the other. Oftentimes, I mean, it goes both ways. We see students just quote dump galore. And then some of them never, you know, draw from the text specifically at all, and it's just all paraphrase. So that's a delicate balancing act. And then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. And I really want to emphasize this. So it's the conclusion of the body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay, is the textual analysis. And I always tell my students that the first premise is a promise. You kind of got to go back and shake hands. So it's like a link or an echo. You're gonna hear the thesis, the remnant of the thesis in that conclusion. So real astute students saying, you know, Mr. Kuhn, introductions are 4 sentences because we're using a template. We're using a template for the body paragraph, so you must have a number of sentences in mind. And I do. Those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence body paragraphs that we often see don't cut to the chase. There's not enough support or analysis in there to fully substantiate an argument. So I tell my students, shoot for 10 sentences. I think that's plenty of space to draw support and to, you know, tear things apart so that you have a fully fleshed out argument. I do, however, put a hard cap at 12 sentences. I don't want my students bloviating. I don't want them getting wayward. No bird walks, no plot summary at all, no plot analysis at all. So a hard cap at 12 to keep them focused so that they can sustain the line of reasoning. So here it is, the whole syllogistic body paragraph. So there's little tricks to this, little hacks. Chronology and sequence help students sustain the line of reasoning. So I always tell my students, begin where the author begins. So begin where Steinbeck begins. What's his first rhetorical move? And then let's weave the pieces together so that we're multitasking the terms and devices. So you'll see my students transition with phrases like right from the onset or immediately Steinbeck. Right? So indicate to your reader that you have logic, that you are setting up a line of reasoning, that you have chronology, that you have sequence. And you do this for poetry too. Any of the literary analysis genres. So right from the onset, Steinbeck makes it perfectly clear that a man of his stature would never ask for such a favor, right? So he establishes his ethos right out of the gate. Positioning himself as a celebrity, likewise burdened by annoying fans, he makes certain to moan and groan before indicating the exact nature of his purpose for reaching out. So the ethos and the tone are going to be analyzed here. going the route of humor, so that's the pathos, and deprecation, which is also part of the ethos. Steinbeck takes careful steps to let Monroe know that he's not just another pathetic person inconveniencing her. So I always tell my students the first premise is a promise. So there's three things rhetorically promised here. So we should, if we're going to sustain the line of reasoning, have a discussion of the ethos, the pathos, and the tone, right? We have to talk about those three things. If anything extraneous comes in, it might be okay, like if we just make some brief mention to some syntactical feature that helps embolden these things or support these things. But we don't want to get into a whole big long discussion of syntax, because then we're going to break our line of reasoning. We broke our promise, right? We don't want to omit a discussion of one or two or three of these things, because then we've broken our line of reasoning. We have to get all three. So the quotes and the paraphrases all have to be germane to those three things to sustain the line of reasoning. So fourth sentence begins the second premise. And I tell my students, get into the text. Immediately get into the text. So strategically look at this. If the quote is coming in the fourth sentence, it kind of gives the clue to the reader that this kid ain't plot summarizing, not plot analyzing. When those quotes start up in like the first, the second sentence, then the student is indicating to the reader typically that they are doing plot summary or plot analysis. So by withholding the quote until the fourth sentence, the argument gets established. So that's perfect. We're sticking to the demands of the assignment. Immediately, he removes himself from the equation and reasons that in his whole experience, he's never known anyone to ask for an autograph for themselves. So that's the ethos, right? That quote pertains to the ethos. Note the brackets. So I teach my students how to do that because the quotes want to sound conversational. And there's a trick for that. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of a quote, so a minimum, not exactly, it should sound conversational. So I really want my students to get away from quote dumping. I want them to get away from quoting huge gargantuan quotes, which sometimes we see. It's wordplay, it's diction analysis, right? Be skillful about it. So we quoted, we got to analyze it. So look at the transition here. In stating this, so you're indicating to your reader that you are going to analyze your quote and continue the analysis of the ethos. Steinbeck makes it clear that he certainly would never degrade his esteemed self to do such a thing. Ironically, given that his entire rhetorical purpose is to make an outlandish request, he asserts that it is always on behalf of a child or an ancient aunt. All right, so just draw. You need support, right? Quote, paraphrase, analyze. In essence, therefore, folks who are none the wiser for not knowing that their behavior is very tiresome and invoking certain nausea. Right? So you don't need to take huge quotes. The student's just doing wordplay. Very tiresome, 2 words. Certain nausea, 2 words. A child or an ancient adult. Just pick and parcel, right? Is what I tell my students. And it's very skillful analysis. But we're still doing things that we talked about in the introduction. Sentence constructs for voice, rhythm, flow. Academic tone, right? We want to see the tier 2. So you gotta sustain that the whole essay. So, all right, we got to move on, right? So we got the ethos. We got plenty of support, plenty of analysis. We're good to go. Overemphasizing the fact that he is likewise a celebrity who gets asked for all kinds of silly favors, he doubles down and makes it clear that he's reaching out on behalf of his nephew-in-law. So it continues on to the next slide. I'm out of space here. Given that the favor is pretty far out there, Steinbeck plays the sympathy and pity card in order to get Monroe to acquiesce by suggesting that John has his foot in the door of puberty. So you see here, all these quotes sound super conversational, right? That 5-word rule really works. Keep the quote small, bracket when you need to. And then, all right, so we quoted. has his foot in the door of puberty. We got to unpack that. So you'll see my students do this 1, 2, 3 punch, right? 1, 2, 3. Quote, paraphrase, analyze. Placing the emphasis on pubescence, which Steinbeck feels holds a great deal of ridiculousness, it therefore is okay and reasonable to make such an entreaty. Now, note the sentence constructs here again. Like, what a great use of a parenthetical. That's pretty cool. And then look at this. Plus, comma, like other boys in their early teens, comma, John is merely infatuated, hyphen. And given that Steinbeck is such a good uncle, hyphen. He postures as if he's just doing the kid a huge favor, hyphen. And Monroe should certainly understand this. So that's where the practice of all that sentence structuring comes into play. Holy moly, is that advanced, right? 16-year-olds writing that. It's killer. It's amazing. Really, really good writing. So let's go back. Have we sustained the line of reasoning? The 3 things that we promised up here, have we focused on that? Is there enough support and analysis to say, yes, indeed, we've kept that favor? Did anything extraneous come in? Well, we talked about irony, just briefly, so that's fine. We didn't go on a bird walk, so it's totally good, totally aligned, totally cogent. In the end here, let's make the promise and echo the thesis. Steinbeck knows full well that what he is asking is out of the ordinary and a bit bizarre, if not brazen. Treading this way and in taking this linguistic angle, he adds a bit of smoke and mirrors, but he's given it the old college try. Right. So throughout this, this student used a little bit of colloquial vernacular for that voice point, and I love it. It's really, really solid. But the key thing here is, the template is what yields this line of reasoning and this logical progression. Nailed it, right? So that line of reasoning is pegged from start to finish. It never deviates. It never breaks. And it holds true to the promise. So that's one of the things that, that's the main thing that the template of the syllogistic method can yield and produce for your students, no matter whether they're emerging, struggling, students can manipulate this. And I think that was 11 sentences, and it's very full, right? Very full, concrete, complete analysis. And that's what I like to see, and that's what my students are shooting for, and what I'm shooting for as a composition teacher is to get my students to write like this. And obviously this is a really good student, but the others can manipulate the template to their own making and ability, and do some decent stuff. So let's wrap this up. As you may know, I bounce around a little bit, so I have a few irons in the fire. So I'm doing monthly webinars, and they're free with Perfection Learning. I've been doing a little bit of everything. So some things on line of reasoning, my alternative grading methods, my templates. I have the Plato's Plato discussion that I do, and I have a lot of that stuff in the YouTube video. So staying busy with that. I have an iron in the fire with the National Writing Project, and we have some things on the docket coming up, and it's all free. And then probably my biggest project right now, which is something really cool. You guys may know Tim Freitas of the Garden of English. He posts in YouTube quite a bit, and has an amazing channel and is a fantastic teacher. We are collaborating on a textbook together where we're basically going to talk about the fact that there's many ways to skin the compositional fish. So his templates are very different than mine, but it's effective. He's a phenomenal teacher, and his students do fantastic work. My templates are different. So there's no like magic bullet, like, one template is the best. So there's many ways to go about this. So we're sitting down to write that, and we're cobbling it together at our own pace. And one of the things that I've done to help me with getting some research and just some anecdotal information is I created something called the Teach It Right 5-Week Mastermind. So looking for like real ambitious, super eager beaver teachers that look at my content and say, wow, I like this. I want to bring this into my classroom. So what we do is, I just started one this week, and it's just 3 teachers. I keep it very small, 3 teachers and myself. We're going to meet for 5 straight weeks. And this one is running Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sometimes we do it Sunday night, just depends on the availability of the group. And we're going over everything, all my templates, my Nuance Academy, my Word Study Academy, my Plato's Plato discussion modality, the alternative grading methods. And as students that just, or teachers that are saying, I really want to revamp, I really want a tool, I really want to redo how I teach composition and the chemistry and the makeup of my instructional delivery. So the 4 of us work very closely together. We collaborate. Like sometimes I even zoom in to the classrooms and help until we get it. And ultimately, what we're going to do is equip students with all of these things and report back. Is it effective? What's happening? Is there magic occurring? Is it transformational? What goes on with the social emotional learning component. So all of those things. So if you're interested in joining me and us with that, reach out. I have my email address there at the bottom, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I also have some information on that mastermind on my webpage, teachinghowtowrite.com. And if you want this template, for your own classroom use with the exemplars and models, just email me, identify what you're asking for, because I have a ton of stuff on YouTube, and I'll be happy to send it your way. So for now, happy writing, happy teaching, and hope all is well. See you soon.